Ruchem Avoim B'Shem Hashem B'Shem Irgin Shirtei. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov as Mishlita on Dinei Sechita b'Matzavim Shonim, challenging Sechita questions. Have the Tzuz sponsoring a shir call Irgin Shirtei 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Rav Smith.
This Shiloh grab is negay every Shabbos, but it's in Yonah D'Yoyma when you didn't have the minig on Rosh Hashanah, we have a pomegranate, the rimoin. So the Shiloh is when you cut the rimoin, the pomegranate, typically the juice oozes out. So there are two Shilohs. Number one, is that a problem of Sechita? Because evidently there's something happening. The rimoin doesn't have juice, you cut it, and you're producing a juice. Is that a problem of Sechita? And if it's a problem of Sechita, is there any issa in enjoying the fruit, the juice? Once there's an accumulation, you might drink it up. So if it's a Sechita, and if it is a Sechita, is there a problem of enjoying the juice? I'll tell you another Shaila, and then we'll get to the other Shailas. But the Haviyuv, we have someone who has 2 bee farms, incidentally, and he grows honey. So one year before Rosh Hashanah, he always sends me honey every Rosh Hashanah. But one year he sent me a honeycomb. I don't mean the cereal honeycomb, I mean the real thing. It's a kai where the honey is actually manufactured, if that's the right word, by the bees. So he cut me a slice of a honeycomb, and the assumption was to have it for Rosh Hashanah. But as we'll see, it's not pashut at all that you're allowed to extract the honey from the honeycomb. And we'll see other benefits of learning the sugya. It's really, we touch upon a few sugyas in halacha. But to make a long story short, this sugya is not only geya to every single Shabbos, but geya to Yom Tov as well. Because this is really part of the issa of the dash. Dash means threshing, as we'll soon see. And even on Yom Tov, where many malachas are mutlat tzarich eichel nefesh, you're allowed to cook, you're allowed to carry, but the only heta of malacha on Yom Tov is lisha ve'elach, beyond lisha. This is the malacha of dash, which is before lisha. So really the issa of Sechita that I'm going to talk about today, of mefarek, applies to Yom Tov as well. So although I'll say Shabbos, because diva kasa b'hoiva, but today's sugya is Shabbos and Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah. So besides 52 Shabbos every year, it's also 13 days of Yom Tov. What does dash mean, and how does that apply to taking honey from a honeycomb, etc.? So in the Mishkan, after they cut the stalks, that either the stalks were the tfua to make the lechem upon them, to make the breads, or the stalks grew the herbs to make the dye, to color the material. So you had basically a plant, a stalk, and the tfua, or the herbs. And you have to separate the tfua from the shaft, from the stalk. And that's the malacha of dash. Either they had animals stepping on it to separate the food product, the good product, from the plant, or they had a special machine, now they're a machine, but then they had a certain type of instrument that they would hit the actual growth, and that would separate it. But I think the right way to teach dash is mefarek oichol mimakim gidulai. In other words, you're taking the wheat from the kernel, or the herbs from the plant. A perfect example of dash, mefarek, which is based on a Gemara. Mr. Bura brings it in Shin Chav Aleph Sivkat and Mem Ches, and early in Sivkat and Mem Vav, is extracting honey from a honeycomb. Because although it's not gidulei karka, doesn't grow from the ground, but that doesn't make a difference. The halacha is that dash is taking the food product from where it grows, from its encasement. The honey is produced in the honeycomb. So there's no doubt about it that the Poskim say, based on again the Gemara, to come out of Mishnah, that taking honey from a honeycomb is a malacha d'oraisa. And the Chayodim and Yudalad Yud says, Efshad, it's chayiv, it's a mamash d'oraisa, but to us it's not a chiddush. So this is basically the malacha of mefarek. We'll soon see if a person has a honeycomb and forgot to take out the honey before Yom Tov, the eitzah would be to put the honeycomb onto the bread. And the halacha is, if you make Sechita onto oichel, that relieves the issa. So that might be a heta, we'll soon explain that. But no doubt about it, this honeycomb is a problem on Shabbos and Yom Tov as well. Another perfect example of mefarig, it's a Gemara in Shabbos Sadikei, and that is milking a cow on Shabbos. Now to us in Brooklyn, the furthest thing from our mind is milking a cow, but the Achenu B'nai Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael that live on Fruma Kibbutzim, they have farms, and the question is, Shabbos comes, you can't leave a cow unmilked for the entire 24 hours. Especially Rosh Hashanah, don't forget, in Eretz Yisrael is 2 days, like in Chutz La'aretz. A 2-day Yom Tov is certainly a problem. So the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Sadikei, Achoylev, if someone milks a cow, Chayiv Mishum Mefareg. Zok Rashi, K'may Mefareg Masui, that's the Mlosh Mefareg you're taking out, She'porik Oichol Mimokim Shenis Kasabay, V'havi Teilada Didosh. Now here we have to get acquainted with terms. The Malacha Deraisa is Mefareg. A teilada is also deraisa, but it's not actually the way it was in the Mishkan. In the Mishkan, they didn't have cows. The Mishkan, they had tfua. But taking milk from a cow, which is its makim gidulai, is the same malacha, albeit a teilada, not an av. So we have a malacha deraisa, the av malacha of dash. Taking honey from the honeycomb or milk from the cow is a teilada. When I was yeshiva, they used to call milk cow juice. Ganz fine. That's really what it is. It's produced in the cow. The Mishnah in Shin Hey Sif Kat and Ayin Aleph discusses the issa of milking on Shabbos. What is on Yom Tov? So that's a big sug in Hilchas Yom Tov, Taf Kuf Aleph. Lamaisa, the minig is they milk to alleviate tzar l'chaim onto the ground. So therefore it goes the ibud, and that's not the actual malacha, but mokim tzar b'alechayim, that would be mut. So lemaisa, it's very nice. We're talking about dash by tfua, by cows and honey. Again, living in Brooklyn, we don't have any of these. So why is this such a relevant sugya? So here the Mishnah in Shabbos introduces us to a new form of dash. Zok the Mishnah, ein soichten es apeiros lahoitz me mashkin. You cannot squeeze a fruit. We'll soon see it's a grape. You can't squeeze grapes on Shabbos or Yom Tov to make a mashke. Now what's wrong? Zok Rashi the Havilei Mefarek Teilada Didash. So this is a very logical extension of the Malacha Deraisa. Taking something Mimakim Gidule, taking the wheat or the herbs is dashya. Milking a cow, taking honey is a telada, right? Well, guess what? Squeezing a grape to make grape juice is the same mefareg. You're taking grape juice, you're squeezing it out, mimakim gidulai. It happens to grow in grapes. So you're creating a new juice by squeezing. Now, lamaisa, it's the same deraisa. Again, a telada is just that it's not exactly like in the Mishkan, but it's the same halacha deraisa. But before we apply this more specifically, we have to learn a Gemara in the end of Kuf Mem Hey that very much qualifies when the Issa doesn't apply. Zok the Gemara, Dvar Torah, Rashi says, Issa Torah, Einei Chayiv Ela Al Drichas Zeisim Vanavim Bilvad. The Malacha Deraisa is not all fruits. The Malacha Deraisa is exclusively squeezing grapes or squeezing olives to make olive oil. The obvious assumption is that all other peiros midaraisa are mutter to squeeze. Midaraisa, you're allowed to squeeze a pomegranate to make juice. It's only what the peiros can refer to as zeisim v'anavim. Zeisim, of course, is shem and zayis. Anavim is grape juice, which is the beginning of wine. Now, the obvious question is, I don't understand this. You're taking your hands, you're squeezing the pomegranate. It's the same ma'isa schit like squeezing a grape. Why is this asa deraisa, and why is this l'chayra muta miyakidin muta l'chatchila? So Rashi says lav or chayu bahem. It's not the derech to squeeze other peiros. Only grapes and zeisim are squeezed. So Rashi says the kamat teferes, but you want to see mefurish the Tosfos read ein lecha shinui gadol mizeh. When you make apple juice, orange juice, pomegranate juice, you're right, you're going through the motions. You're doing a ma'isa schita. But it's a shinui. Because the only real schita applies to Zeisim Vanav. Now I must tell you, the simple hezbollah, it's hard to relate to. In today, we live in a very affluent society. We can afford squeezing a pomegranate and throwing it in the garbage. We can afford to squeeze a grape and squeeze an apple and throwing it in the garbage. But in those days, they had nothing to eat. Whatever they was able to eat, they wouldn't waste it. So people didn't take the luxury of making juice. Zeisim v'anavim are the two fruits that are grown to make juice. The bracha on grape juice is a bar piyagafen. The bracha on olive oil, when it's edible, is a bar piyait. That indicates it's grown to make juice. So it's not a shinui, it's not something abnormal when you make juice. So Rashi and Taizrid learn that the heta of Shar Paris is shinui. However, many Rishonim, the Rashba, the Ritva, the Rosh, the Yereim, and the Ran, all say a golden yesod that we're going to use very much for our sugya. And they basically say, since it's not typical to make juice, so when you squeeze out, Lamosh, you squeeze out apple juice, we don't look at the juice as a mashka. It's something like an extract. It's something basically not the actual. It's not a juice because it's not the derech to make the juice. And listen to this lamdis. Zok the Rosh ein shem mashkel ayoytzi menu. The issa deraisa of Sechita is not squeezing. It's wrong. The issa deraisa of squeezing is making a juice by squeezing. You're making a new entity, and it's very understandable. You're making a new metzias. So all these Rishonim say that when you squeeze Zeisim Vanav, you're making a juice. Oh, that's the malacha. But as the I'll give you another lashon, the lashon of the Rashba, that when you squeeze out other peiros, it's not considered like chashiv mashke ela oichel. So if you're making an oichel from an oichel, it can't be Sechita. It's like cutting an apple in half. The issa only is when you're making a mashke. So the correct definition of Sechita would be making a mashka by squeezing. Now there's a little different of a hezbollah that really enhances the previous hezbollah. And this is a beautiful yesod. We find the Mishnah in Machshirim, Perek Vav Halacha Dalet, talking about Hilchas Tumah, but very relevant. When something is makabel Tumah only when it was made moist by one of the Zayim Mashkois. What are these Zayim Mashkois? So the way to remember it is Yad, Shchat, Dam. Yad is Yayin, Devash, Shemen, Cholav, Tal, and Dam is, because Dam, and Mayim. Did you notice something very significant? 4 out of the 7 mashkois are Sechita deraisa. Let's go back again. There's Cholav, Shemen, Zeisim, Shemen Zayis, and Yayim. Zok the Prima Godam in the beginning of Siman Shincha, both in Eish Lavam and Mishtah Zahab, an unbelievable yesod. That means the Torah recognizes milk, honey, grape juice, and Shemen Zayis as a mashka. There's no mention of apple juice in the 7 mashkois. So that means when you have your Torah eyes, and you have to live your life with your Torah eyes, when you see olive oil, or grape juice, or milk, or honey, you see a mashka. But when you look at apple juice, you don't see a mashka. So what is it? Like an oichel. No, if you didn't make mashka, then it's not the issa of Sechita. And this is what the Prima Godam says, and that gives a little more hezbollah to the second shot that I mentioned, that the mice is squeezing an oichel. It's like you cut an apple in half. It's like uchel de efres. It's like a secretion. So and we'll soon see that lamai is still issa the rabbanan, but the yesod adav, and I'm going to use this a lot, is that the issa of Sechita is not squeezing per se. It can't be, because this minei ubeh you'll have to squeeze other payers. The issa is creating a juice. Now, Lamaisa, what's interesting is that the Gemara qualifies that it's not every other mashke is mutter. No. It's tusim v'rimoinim, berries and pomegranates. That's an issa d'Rabbanan. Because that the derech was to make juice. But shar peiris, as the Shulchan Aruch refers to it in the beginning of Shin Chav, is mutlach atchila. Now, in recent years, people started juicing everything. So everything became like tusim v'rimoinim. So let's be clear. Shulchan Aruch Shin Chaf Sif Aleph says Zeis V'Ravan is a Raisa, Tusum V'Mayim D'Rabanan, and Shar Paris is Mutter. Today we're going to have, not that halacha changes, but the Metzias change. Zeis V'Ravan is still the Raisa. Shar Paris, not only Tusum V'Mayim, but any other Peri is an Issa D'Rabanan. Because the Maisa, Midrabanan, Chazal said, listen, it's juiced. And you're making a juice. So it is an Issa D'Rabanan. But what remains, the Raisa, is honey, milk, Zaysim, Vanab. Now, the Maisa, you'll wonder, what's the difference, the Raisa D'Rabanan, Chaviv and Divrei Seifrim, the teretz is, when you have a suffix, or any tzat to be makel, there's more tzat to be makel by a D'Rabanan. Okay, now let's apply this Lamaisa. I'll give you a primary example. Someone had the shaila, he made, before Shabbos in fact, he cut up melons, cantaloupe, honeydew, watermelon, and he put it away for Shabbos for the Suda, for dessert. And it was a very good product, and it sold, it was gone. But on the bottom of the bowl, there must have been 6 or 7 ounces of freshly squeezed fruit juice. It was the result of the watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew, sitting together overnight, and the juice, oozed out. So he said, oh, it's a good drink, fresh, there's no additives. Someone says, no, you know how to drink it, mashkin shezavu. So it sounded intelligent, mashkin shezavu. But Lamaisa, this Paisik made a mistake. Why? Lamaisa, he's right that it is mashkin shezavu, but he didn't apply it correctly. The Mishnah that we began with, that says you're not allowed to squeeze fruits on Shabbos, Zeis V'Nav, that is, Zok the Mishnah, regarding squeezing Zeis V'Nav, that's a deraisa, not only is it awesome to squeeze it, im yatsu me'atzmam awesome. If the olive oil or the wine, and typically when you leave wine in a barrel, the juice oozes out on its own. So Zok the Mishnah, even though there was no ma'isa schit, no ma'isa whatsoever, L'masha, you cut up grapes Erev Shabbos, and you left it in a barrel. So naturally, the juice oozes out. Zok the Mishnah, that's awesome, even if there's no Issa Sechita. Why? Rashi says, Gezeira Shema Yiskachayit Lechatchila. Because last week, Sigalungin, you cut up grapes and you had fresh grape juice. So this week, you'll squeeze it out. Now, you'll do a little squeezing, but don't get, a little squeezing is a big Issa. It's an Issa of Sechita. So the Paiskim said, when you're dealing with Zeisim Vanavim, it's so much of an Issa that even if there was no Ma'isa Sechita, Mashkin Shezavu was us. Why? Because the result could be a terrible Chilul Shabbos Daraisa. Now, if you notice, the Mishnah is continuing. Zeisim Vanavim is Sechita. Mashkin Shezavu is us. So all the Paiskim say that Lamaisa, this Gezeira of Mashkin Shezavu only applies to something that potentially could be a deraisa. But Shar Paris, which can't be a deraisa, even Tusim V'Rimoinim Zavu. But if it can't be a deraisa, it's almost like a shtickle of a Gezeira l'Gezeira. Now the Shulchan Aruch does say, if you bought the other Paris to make a mashka, that's more of a problem. But typically, our fruit juice is kamat b'ferish Mishnah. That the halacha of mashkin zavu only applies to zeisim anavim that potentially could be a deraisa. But shar pears that you bought for the achila, like our case of the fruit platter, fruit salad, the kinyan torah chelik vav simon yotches shmir Shabbos hey yud aleph, both say beferish. This type of a juice that came from shar pears, which was bought for achila, is 100% mutter. So the pasuk that applied mashkim sezavu, it sounded intelligent, but it was incorrect. The mashkim sezavu is only by zeisim v'anav. So here we see a nafkamina pshuta between a deraisa level and a darbana level. Now, lamaisa, this is clear. Now, the paskim in fact add this gezeir when it applies mashkim sezavu with olive oil or wine is lav dafka when a ma'isa issa. In fact, even if a guy squeezed grapes for his own, or squeezed olive, there's an issa mashkin shezavu. In fact, when you cut up Erev Shabbos grapes and you left it in a barrel, and the juice on its own oozed out, it's also mashkin shezavu. More so, the Rav Shulchan Aruch in Shin Ches see if you test, and the Shmir Shabbos, everybody agrees to this command, except Rabbi Kiva feel that when you have a mashkin zezavu situation, not only it's also to drink, but it becomes muktzah. You see, you can't drink it on Shabbos, so it's functionless. Now, it's not an issa deraisa of hano like bas b'challah, but lemaisa, you can't drink it on Shabbos. So not only is it also to drink, it becomes muktzah. But the point that we must hear is there are two independent isurim that we have to deal with. Number one, the issa of Sechita, which is a deraisa, and number two, even if there's no ma'isa Sechita, no issa Sechita whatsoever, but the mashkin zezavu is an independent issa, independent of a ma'isa issa. The issa is having hana from the mashkin shezav. So lamaisa, I should mention, if you realize, it's obvious that let's say you have honey shezavu. It should also be us, because honey is a potential deraisa, and milk shezavu also. In other words, when you have a deraisa scenario, then it's asa mashkin shezavu without a ma'isa issa. When it's only at most at the rabbanon level, like shar peiros, then there's an issa Sechita, no doubt about it, midabonim. But there is no issa mashkin sezavu if it was bought for achila. A different question, and this is a question that we have to deal with because on Maisa it's very common. Let's say I cut a piece of watermelon, okay, for Moshe, and I cut it, and I notice when I cut it, juice oozes out. So there's no problem mashkin sezavu. My question is simple. Why is there no problem of cutting the watermelon? Because, look, I cut a piece of watermelon. Now, depending on the watermelon, but if you have a juicy piece of watermelon, when you cut it, there's juice. So, before I started, there was no juice. Now I have juice. Why isn't the cutting a ma'isa Sechita? Now, let me give it a little more of a geschmack to the sugya. When you cut a tomato, now again, not every tomato is the same, but I could assume that in some tomatoes, when you cut a tomato, juice always comes out. But that could be because the maisa, in a tomato there is juice. But the Bershta made a wonderful container that's leak proof, and that's a tomato. When you cut it open, it's not that you created the juice, you just let the juice, you release the juice from its container. But a piece of watermelon, or sometimes you have an orange, a lemon, a grapefruit I think more so, when you cut it, you're creating the juice. Because you're cutting through the fruit itself, the friction makes that type of Sechita. So my question is, when you cut a grape, again a juicy grape, it could happen that you make juice. So the question is, when do we say that cutting is a ma'isa Sechita? In other words, maybe there's no mashkin sezavu because it's shar peiros, because it's watermelon, it's grapefruit, orange, but the problem is independently of Sechita. Now I'm not talking about someone that has nervim. I'm talking about someone that when you cut a fruit, you see this juice on the table. Is that a problem of Sechita? It's only the Rabbanan, fine, but the Rabbanan is still the Rabbanan. So the Bris Oilam, that's a B'yamin Zilba's first sefer, in Hilchas Dosh, Sifid Aleph, he talks about grapefruit, and the Chayra, the Metzias is often that like that. Cutting a grapefruit should be a problem of Sechita. And therefore he says you have to make sure to cut in a way that the Maisa, it won't be a psikration. Now if you get a sharp knife and you cut it very swiftly, maybe it doesn't make juice. But his point is cutting a grapefruit should be a problem of Sechita. The Kitzur Hilchos Shabbos, Perik Yud, Ois Dalet, that was a Dayan Posen, one of the first svarim that was very popular in Hilchos Shabbos, he talks about cutting a lemon. Cutting a lemon, typically the juice oozes out. Where's it coming from? Obviously it's the friction of cutting through those the lemon food itself that makes the juice. Cutting fresh grapes. So again, fresh grapes typically don't produce a juice unless you don't have a sharp knife. But the point should be that cutting through fruits that make a juice would be a Sechita. Now, is there any limud schus? Or better yet, how do you do it beheta? So this I spent some time on because it's something very common. We're going to have a Rosh Hashanah. Leil Rosh Hashanah, we want to do things perfectly, and we cut a pomegranate and we have juice. Where'd it come from? It's not stored in the pomegranate like the tomato juice. So what's the heta? So the best heta would be when you invest on a sharp knife and slice it swiftly. Don't chop it, don't crush it. See, if you cut something and you do it right, it's possible to cut it without making a juice. So then once it's not a psik reisha, that would be a heta. But there's another heter, and this is an important yesod, and that is when you cut, let's say you're cutting a lemon, and you cut it onto a paper towel, or onto a countertop, and the juice that comes out is what's called a hoylech le'ibud. So if it's hoylech le'ibud, it's not a ma'isa schita. In other words, if you cut something into a cup, you produce juice, and then you spill it out, Zakti bi'alach and shin chaf, sif yoches, quoting a Taz, that's not a heter. You first made juice, and then you spilled it out. So you made juice first. So you know that's a ma'isa issa. But if you cut it initially, and it never had a shem mashke, because it was hoylech le'ibud onto a counter, or onto a napkin, it's hoylech le'ibud. Onto a plate where you might, gather it is a problem. But when you cut it a makam shehoylech le'ibud, it's just not the ma'isa of schita. Now, of course, do it in a way a practical way, don't make the whole kitchen dirty, that's shalom bayis issues. I don't want to get into that. But when you cut it in a way that it's hoylech le'ibud onto a napkin, and pick up the napkin and throw it in the garbage, that should not be a problem of schita at all. Of course, if you have such a metzias that the juice is already there, you're just cutting it and you're releasing the juice, so that's not schita. But typically that's not the case. I did see more of a halacha dekeheta, the Shmir Shabbos in Perik Hey Ha'or Mem Tes quotes Reb Shlomo Zalman regarding grapefruit. Now grapefruit, we'll soon see, is probably the most problematic because it has the most juice and also the least discussion in Poskin. Now this is something that's noteworthy. When you look in the Gemara, you will not find anything about lemons. You'll find tusim and remoinim. You won't find lemons. Lemons is first found in the Rishonim. The Rosh discusses, today we have lemons. The other Rishonim, Beis Yosef, but grapefruit is not even in Beis Yosef or Rosh, because they're all hybrids, and it's all different periods of history. The Rishonim had lemons. Now all citrus fruits, this is someone told me, the Metzias, are hybrids except for an esrig, a pamela, and a mandarin. Everything else is a mixture. But anyhow, grapefruit is very much a juicy fruit. When you eat it, you produce juice. But he discusses this, and he basically says that this would be a classic example of psik reisha d'lei nichalei and tu d'rabanan. First of all, he says that when you cut the grapefruit, you're not interested in having the juice spill out. You rather keep it in the fruit. That's number one. And that's why it's a psik reisha d'lei nichalei. What's the tu d'rabanan? So pashit, every grapefruit by definition is only d'rabanan, because the rice is only zeis v'anavim. The oid, it's not the derech to squeeze by cutting a grapefruit in half. It's a shinim. So his point is that it might simulate a malacha, but it's so much diluted, psik reisha d'lei nichalei and tu d'rabanan. That's his head. Okay. The Chazanish Kayadua, I should mention, Mr. Brewer in a few places mentioned this head of psik reisha d'lei nichalei and tu d'rabanan. But there's the Chazanish in Siman Samach Aleph Sif Aleph, he says there's no makar in Shas for this heter. It might make sense, might be logical, but there's no such heter. So what is the heter? So listen to this. This is an extremely important yesod for the rest of the shir. The Gemara says in Shabbos, Kuf Mem Daled Amud Beis, that's almost a medrash pliya. Soichit Adam, you're allowed to squeeze. Eshkol Shonaf, you have to take a whole cluster of grapes, squeeze it, l'toicha kedera, into a pot. Avaloi l'soicha kar, but not into a plate. Now this is a pliya. Grapes, deraisa, you're allowed to squeeze on Shabbos. Now, if there's some type of mysterious heter, why is it limited to pot versus plate? What's the logic? So Rashi Kadarka says golden avert. L'toicha kedera does not mean a pot versus a plate, but kedera means there's food in the pot. Kara means an empty plate. Zok Rashi, when you squeeze a grape into a cup, what did you do? You did the ma'isa schita. You created juice by squeezing. That's otherwise. When you squeezed a grape into food, now you realize you never made juice. It was a grape, which is an eichel. You squeeze it into, I don't know why, into challah or onto fish. So now it's part of the fish. So Rashi, it's like mafrid oichel mei oichel. You took a grape, which is an oichel, squeeze it into fish, which is an oichel, it never became a mashka. That's why there's no issa schita. Because like I told you earlier, the issa schita is not squeezing per se. It's creating a mashka. But here, you made a oichel. Now, of course, the obvious question is, what do you mean? When I squeeze it, let's say I'm holding the grape 3 inches above the fish. So it did go in the air as a mashka. So that's the Chazon Ish's kasha. And the Chazon Ish answered very simply that Lamaisa, you're not doing it to make a juice. It's just basically soifer lanuach, and therefore doesn't have a shem mashke in the air. See, today, the way the Bacham talk, I use the word, it's not a matziv. The juice in the air is not a matziv. It's just in transit. It's a hechatimtza. So the Dr. Chazon Ish, the juice is soifer lanuach. We don't look at the 3 inches that it travels. It went from an oichel into an oichel. Now, this is a pliyadik yisoid. But the point is, it's lav dafka plate versus pot. It's a teich oichel or into a cup. So if someone wants to squeeze a lemon onto his fish, it's perfectly mutter. That's mashka, it's oichel, the oichel. If he's a batlin and said, let me do it a little more sophisticated, so he squeezes the lemon into the cup, and then he pours it onto the fish. So that's a malacha deraisa, or derabbanan hakapara, because that's a sabbath. But the point is the heta of Sechita bola toich oichel. So here, the poskim say that when you have to, especially by grapefruit, when you cut the grapefruit, so if you do it carefully, it could be, it's not a psik reisha. If you have a hechatim, so you could cut it into food, then you have a heta of habola toich oichel. But typically, that's not so common, because what are you going to do? You're going to cut it in air, into the food. But Lamaisa, the poskim say, we'll soon see why this is very negeya to grapefruit, as we'll soon see. But here we have another important yisoid. Lamaisa, the Rabbeinu Chananel, one of the Rishonim, on the Gemara, says, Lamaskana, there's no heta of a bal teich oichel. He learns the Gemara differently. And he says, I'm concerned about a chiyav chatos. So what the pashtus of the Rishonim is, it's perfectly mutter, the teich oichel. Rabbeinu Chananel says it's chayav chatos. So what do? So the Rosh says, Hamachma taver lo bracha. Make it a din, you can be makel. But Mr. Brewer is more specific when he says that it depends what you're doing. To squeeze grapes onto food, this is makom lahachim. Because zeisim, potentially is a raisa. But to squeeze shar pears onto food, then maybe even it would be mutter lahalacha lechatchil. So that's why the belt knows squeezing a lemon onto fish is mutter. Why? It's a bol teich oichel, ka'oichel dami. Now, where I think this is very practical, the Shmir Shabbos says, what's the heta to eat a grapefruit? Eating grapefruit, if you know, produces a lot of juice. The grapefruit is a very juicy fruit, but more than any other fruit, the way of eating is you take a spoon with a serrated edge and you scrape it. In other words, if you peel the grapefruit and eat one piece at a time, so you can't go wrong. But typically you eat it with a spoon. You first cut it, then you eat it with a spoon, and you scrape it, so you're making juice. Part of the derech chiyuv is making juice. So why is that an issa schita? Forget about mashkiz though, it's my issa schita. The teretz of the Shmir Shabbos, when you're making that juice, it's always habola toich oichel. It's in the peel with the flesh, the meat of the grapefruit. So it's always a built-in heta of schita bola toich oichel. And that's why I must tell you, we'll soon see there are those that are machmir, not to eat a grapefruit on Shabbos, but the minig is to be makel because it's schita bola toich oichel. But the point is, when you're cutting a fruit that produces juice, and again, Rosh Hashanah, if you have a situation that you're cutting the pomegranate and the juice comes out, one should be concerned of a concern of schita. So cut it on a plate that's hoylech le'ibud onto a napkin and then throw it away. That's the best way to do it. If it's not a psik reisha, no, so then it's mutter. But typically, when you cut a pomegranate, the metzias is there's no juice stored in the pomegranate. When you cut through those little seeds, which are full of juice, that really punctures it and makes the juice come out. That's a form of schita. So it's kedai, on Rosh Hashanah especially, we're so careful, cut it onto a place where it is a hoylech le'ibad, or if possible, cut it into or onto an oichel. Now, lamaisa, the eating of the grapefruit, I should mention, the chut shani in chelik beis, amid nun vav, and the Oznidbru very convincingly, Chelik Bey Simen Yud Gimel, they both say that one should not eat grapefruit on Shabbos. There's just too much obsecration when you're scraping it, and obsecration in Ichalei. But as I told you, the minig oilam is to be makel. There's a very nice discussion in the Sefer Oitzos HaShabbos. He has, first he has a shtiklach, a few shtiklach, and he has also tshuvas from gedolim. And Rav Vos's Talmud, the Moshe Klein says, L'maisa, I was once invited to the Shefer Levi's house for Kiddush Shabbos morning, and he gave me a half a grapefruit with a spoon. I guess he was a very health-minded person, and he didn't give all these fancy cakes. I gave him a grapefruit for Kiddush. So obviously it's mutter. Probably the heta is, as long as you're eating it in the context of a bala teich oichel, that's a heta that all agree upon. So if you're eating grapefruit in a way that it's a bala teich oichel, that's why the minig is to be makel and taka to use it. Another point to mention, Rabbi Yashiv, and this is quoted in the Seif in the Avnei Yoshvi Chelik Beis Simen Chav Ches, he says he doesn't like the heta of Sikreish L'Nichalei and two D'Rabbanans, because like the Chazon Ish, there's no makar for that. But his heta is interesting, that when you're oisik and achilas hapri, it can't be nis of Sechita. In other words, if you're cutting something, maybe you could say it's Sechita. But as you're eating a grapefruit, it can't, as a ma'isa chila, it's not a ma'isa Sechita. Okay. We'll soon see a big yisoid that's called Kfashim Ushlakais. I'll explain that soon. But just for the record, the Megillah Seifa, Simen Zayin, Sif Katan Aleph, says that's the heta of eating of a grapefruit. The heta is Al Kfashim Ushlak. Let me get to that soon. But then let's move on. So, Lamaisa, when a person is cutting a fruit that produces juice, and it's a psik reisha, we should realize you should do it b'makayim that it comes out in a hoylech le'ibn. Cutting a lemon, again, it's depending on the lemon, but if a person has a sharp knife and he cuts the lemon, l'chayra, it's not a psik reisha that'll make juice. But the problem is, when he wants to put the lemon into the water, today people have they put lemon into water, gives it a certain of a flavor, or he puts it into hot water where it's not a problem of bishul. So we're not talking about a bishul issue. The question is, what's your motivation to put the lemon into the water? You want the mashke to come out. So isn't that a problem of Sechita? You do want the lemon to come into the water. So let's take this slowly. If you put the lemon in and then you squeeze with a spoon the lemon onto the keli, so you're making a ma'isa Sechita. I'm talking about you cut a lemon, you cut it carefully, there's no Sechita, put it into the water. What's the problem? So it sounds intimidating, but it's really not. Because if you break it up, there's no issue whatsoever. Putting the lemon into the water, I didn't do ma'isa Sechita. Mashkin sezavu is sicher not a problem. Because lemon is shar peres. There's no mashkin sezavu by shar peres. But the question is, it's coming out. So this we have as early as the Tveres Yisrael, and the Chazon Ish and Beis Yotest and Chaz Yitzchak, Shever Levi all go with this Yisoid. Mi'ikad din, you're allowed to put grapes, whole grapes, into a barrel of grape juice. Why is this a Sechita? There it says, you're not doing Sechita. It evolves on its own. Zogt the Magen Avram, and this is the Magen Avram quoting a Bach in Sif Cotton Hay, that you're allowed to put anavim into wine, that they should burst and go into the wine. Sechita, you're not doing Sechita, I'm sorry. You're not doing Sechita, you're putting grapes. Mashkin sezavu, so the assumption is that it goes in and emerges before it becomes a mashka. But that we're not going to talk about now. But here's the point. Maduch, you're allowed to put grapes into a barrel, which is a potential deraisa. Kolshkin, you could put a lemon into water. You'll say, wait a second, I know the Magen Avram is makel to put grapes into a barrel. But the Taz is Sivkot and Gimel is machmir, that you can't put grapes into a barrel. And the Rav and the Chashochan and Siv Tezvav pass like this Taz. So why are you being makel with the lemons? Teretz is pashut. When is the Taz machmir? By grapes, that's the Raisa. By lemon, that's the Rabbanon, who said he's machmir. And also happens to be the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot and Yudalit passes like the Magen Avram. So I'm safe. Magen Avram is makel even by grapes. If you makel by grapes, kolshkein by a lemon. Someone had the shaila. He's a very creative fellow. He wants to have freshly squeezed orange juice on Shabbos, but you're not allowed to. It's an Istar Rabbanan. of Shar Pears. So he said he had a 2-stage process to make freshly squeezed orange juice. He took an orange, you gotta have a juice orange, make it easier, and he basically banged around the fruit to make it all juice. But, here's his catch, he kept the orange whole. So any process of making the fruit into juice is all about teichaychel. Then he took a knife, made a hole, he stuck in a straw into this orange juice, and like Chapakana advises, just drink the pure orange juice. So the chayra, he might have beat the system, because the banging part was in the fruit. Once it's mashkin shezavu b'shar peiros, what could be the problem? So that's what I thought. I did see the Sefer Orcha Shabbos in Perik Daled Sif Chav Ches. He has this very shaila, and he explains in Hagah, because the Maisa pounding on the orange, the whole tachlis is to make a juice. So it's not like it's a tuffle to the oichel. See, why is lemon into fish mutter? Because the lemon becomes a tuffle to the fish. Right? That's logical. But here, you want to make juice. So you can't say, I'm not making juice, I'm making it a tuffle to the fruit. It's not true, you want to make juice. Okay, so don't do that until you have a better svar than what he says. Okay, do before Shabbos for Tetzah. Okay, next question, a beautiful group of questions. And that is what we're going to refer to as Metzitza B'Peh. Now, I don't mean the Mila Metzitza B'Peh. I'm talking about way before the Metzitza B'Peh controversy. The Poskim discussed the following simple shayla. A person wants freshly squeezed orange juice, or he's more aggressive, grape juice. So what do? So he cuts the grape or orange in half, holds it by his lips, by his mouth, not in his mouth, by his lips, like Metzitza B'Peh by Mila, and he sucks out the juice of the grape or the orange. So, no squeezing. The question is that mutter? What's the shaila? So, l'chayra, what should be the problem? But the question is, l'maisa, you're producing juice, right? In your mouth, it's juice. So how do we look at that when a person sucks a juice into his mouth? It's from an oichel, he makes a mashke, but it never had an identity in the air. It's only in his mouth. So we have to find a precedent for this metzias, and we could find it. There's a mikveh ega in Siman Reish Bey Siv Ches talking about this very shaila. Let's talk about an orange. He sucks the juice of the orange, and on Tuesday, no problem of Sechita. Problem is, what bracha do you make? Bar Priyates or Shakom. So up the Pichadash, we make a passing this, you make a Bar Priyates. Because if it never became a mashka, it went from the fruit into your mouth, it's an oichel, and on an orange you make a Bar Priyates. The chayra, it's logical to say, according to that assumption, that you're sucking it out, it never had a shem mashka, l'gabi brachais, hu adin l'gabi schita, and it'll be perfectly mutter. However, some argue, understandably, on the mikveh ega, and they say no. It became a juice in the mouth. Why? Lamani gara, and the brach is shaka. L'chayra, our shah is machlaikis in hilchas bracha. But we could do better. The Yereim in Siman Reish, Ayin Dal, and I quote, Shayra pas, now this we'll soon talk about this, people that put either bread, challah, or cake into coffee, or whatever it is, milk, sucking it out, chayshashani lachatas. The kolshkein, don't you dare extract the grape juice from the grape, because that's really chatas. But the emes is, most Rishonim take strong exception. The Shibali Alekad and Siman Tzaddik, he quotes the Yereim and he says, I don't see any schita. Right into the mouth, it should be schita, and it's a shinoi, and so does the Bala Ita. He says, Lamaisa, it's hard to understand why he's machmir. It's a shinoi, and also Lamaisa, it's in the mouth. So here we see Metzitza B'Peh, besides Hilchas Brachis, Machlaikis Yishayim, this very question. How do we paskin? So the Ramah in our Siman Shin Chav Sif Aleph, he says it's muta limtzais bepiv min hanovim hamashke shebehem bekol shkein b'shar dvarim. You're allowed to suck the grape juice from the grape. Then he adds v'yesh oisrim, like an honorable mention. Don't suck out the grape juice from the grape. Zok the Mishnah Berurah, that you notice that's the right way to do it. To suck out juice might be mutter. But lemaisa, when you're sucking out juice from a grape, that's a potential deraisa. So don't do that. So the Mishnah Berurah makes a compromise. Sucking out the orange juice is fine, because we saw most don't make it. Grapes could also be fine, but the Ramah says yesh oisrim, and therefore be treated like a suffix deraisa, and don't suck out the juice of grapes. Now, that's why the poskim say that lemaisa orange juice is mutter and grape juice is us. The Ktsaisa Shulchan Kuf Chav Ches, Kuf Chavav Sif Kam Chav Ches, he says, but what should be pashit, that you can't squeeze the orange into your mouth when it's not by your lips. That's a ma'isa Sechita. It's only in your mouth. Now, someone asked me this question. He said he gives his baby, young child, to suck on either a piece of watermelon or a piece of a grape. But he's afraid the child will choke, so he puts it in a mesh bag. He says, what about choking a mesh bag? So he explained, this is a new patent they have. They have something like a pacifier, but instead of having a piece of plastic, you suck and nothing there, they have like a mesh bag. You put either watermelon or grapes in it, and it's safe. The child sucks in it and gets the juice. So the shaila is that a problem of Sechita? The child is sucking out the juice from watermelon and or grapes. It's a baby, but we know to give a child doing issa deraisa is also even a ben yomer. So lamaisa, this should be a problem. By grapes suck upon him. However, the Mishnah continues. When is there a machloiket? You have to be machmir by grapes when you suck it by your lips, mitzitz b'peh. But you put it in your mouth there's no issa whatsoever. Now, what's the pshat? So that we know. You're allowed to grind food in your mouth, you're allowed to eat carrots, you're allowed to make toichen, losh, boyer in the mouth, and that's the klaus up to be megod, and there's no issa deraisa in your mouth. So even if takadu be issa schita deraisa by grapes, but in your mouth there's no schita. No. And that's what Mishnah Berurah says. So I was thinking, oy bazoi, that would be perfect, custom made for our mesh bag, that not only is watermelon mutter, but even the grapes are mutter. Because that's the mitzitza, not by the lips, in the mouth itself. And that should be mutter even by grapes. Someone asked me, he enjoys sucking on a piece of a sugar cane. Now let me explain. Sugar does not grow on trees and bags. It grows on something more like a plant, something like a bamboo, and it's full of sweetness. It's really a liquid, but they make it into granules. But anyhow, you could technically take a piece of a sugar cane and suck it. So that is real Sechita. You're extracting it, makom gedulai. But the fact that it's bepeh, so it's no different than any other bepeh, that even gzeis v'nam is mutter, and huadin a sugar cane. Taka Mishnah Berurah, Seif Sikot Yud Aleph is mekel, as is all poiskim. Seif Shulchan and Kuf Chavav Sivkat Chavches has a big chiddush ayin sham, but it's a chiddush. Most poiskim say sugar cane is mutter. After Mila, typically you want to give the baby a little bit of the wine. So they used to meaning the Mohel sticks finger into the wine, puts it in the baby's mouth. But today people are nervous, they have to be sterile. So typically they take a gauze pad, put it into the wine, and put it into the baby's mouth. So the shaila is during the week, that's fine. But by a Shabbos Mila, why is that a problem of the baby doing a ma'isa of Sechita? He's sucking out the gauze pad that has wine in it. He's a baby, but again, sapinin is awesome. Teretz of us is very pashit, because in the mouth there's no issa of Sechita, like there's no issa of teichen alosh. Now, lamaisa, some moyelim, they take the gauze pad, and during the week actually, they squeeze it into the baby's mouth. They don't want the baby to have all the wine, he might get drunk. So they get a little drop. Shabbos don't do that, because squeezing out wine from a gauze pad, if you're in your hand, nothing to do with mitzvah b'peh, and that's taka problem. Now, lamaisa, what you could do, which is practical, but now halachadik also, you could stick the pacifier into the wine on Shabbos, and then the baby sucks it out. There's no problem of Sechita whatsoever. The minig of dipping challah or cake into coffee or wine or soup. So lamaisa, dish l'chayra should be a problem of Sechita when you put it in your mouth and you suck out the juice. Also, lamaisa, let's say sometimes a person put challah into soup and he put too much soup, so he wants to squeeze back some of it back into the soup. He has too much. So lamaisa, this has one redeeming factor that makes it much better than any previous case. In every case of Sechita we had till now, the juice is b'makom gidulai, honey, milk, Paris, you name it. They're all makom gidulay. Here, the soup did not grow in the challah, or the donut, the coffee didn't grow in the donut. So this is something that can't be a deraisa because not makom gidulay. Plus, when you suck out the food from the cake or challah, the juice, in the worst scenario, it's metzitza b'peh. But metzitza b'peh is mutter by nisa d'rabbanan. So that's why it would be perfectly mutter to put something into a liquid and suck it out in your mouth, especially with in your mouth. Avada, that's mutter. But even if it's not in the mouth, but it's metzitza b'peh, don't forget it's only d'rabbanan. But the issue is if sometimes you put too much onto the challah or cake to squeeze it back into the mashke that it came from, that would be a Sechita, because the mice you're putting it back, it's not going to the ibud. Now, a sugar cube that you put into the coffee and they suck out the juice of it is the same hetam. It's a metzitza b'peh by a drabanan, and it's perfectly mut. Another point that I want to mention is sometimes a person has a very oily latkes, and there's too much oil, and he doesn't want it, it's not healthy. So he wants to take a paper towel and basically squeeze on the latkes, take out the oil. Would that be mutter on Shabbos? It doesn't sound too kosher for two reasons. First of all, you're making Sechita on the oil, on the latkes, and number two, it's boyer. However, here we come to what I mentioned earlier, a sugya gedola, which is not for now, but at least the extract we could take. Zok de mechab and shin chaf siv zayin, based on the Gemara in Shabbos kuf chaf hey, lischait kvashim ushlakais. And I was going to explain that im legufan she'ein tzarich l'mayim ve'en tzarich l'saknoi is mutter. Now kvashim means something that was kavish, a pickle. It's very juicy. Is a kavish. It's a pickle that has the juice that it was sitting in it, that it was pickling in it. Shlakis means something is cooked. Let's say a vegetable. You have a carrot from a vegetable, but you want to serve it. It's too juicy. Believe it or not, in both cases, it's mutter halacha to squeeze the pickle out from the excess juice, or the vegetable from the excess juice, if you're doing it to make the vegetable edible. Why? So this has alamailas. It's not there b'toilada, you put it later, and also it's haylach le'ibud, you're not using the juice. And your kavana is basically the masakin the oichel, that the pickle should be served, be edible. So this is the het of kosher mushlakais, that's mutter l'chatchila. The Mechaber does it if you're squeezing out the juice to use the juice, that's a problem. But again, kvashim mishlakais, a very moist pickle, a very moist carrot from the vegetable, from the soup, and you want to serve it to the child, but it's too moist. Squeeze it out, let the juice go to ibud, that would be mutter. So a perfect application of this would be to get the oil out of the latka. It's l'tzoyrech achila, not l'tzoyrech to reuse the oil. So this would be a perfect example of kvashim mishlakais im legufam ve'ein tzarich l'memeim is perfectly mutter. Again, to serve a soup vegetable and it's too moist, squeeze it out, is fine. Someone asked me, he cuts a juicy pickle, and when he cuts, he noticed the juice comes out. Maybe it's a problem of Sechita by the cutting. I said, you're asking a good question, but the answer is simple. Because not only is it mutter to cut the pickle, but it's even mutter to squeeze the pickle. Because this is different than we learned till now. This is kvashim ushlakos. Now, lamaisa, that's all as far as the issa Sechita. What about the problem of boira? Why is there no problem of boira? And the answer is enechanami. If this latke is so oily, they say if you put why do they serve latke in Chanukah? Because you put a wick in it, it could burn 8 days, from all the oil in the latke. If there's so much oil you can't eat it, it's takab soilis, and it's takab boira. But the Pais can say the het of kashmir shlakais is that it's edible as it is, but you want to have an extra precaution. Just like in Shin Yotes Sif Yud, that when you want to sift water, but there are impurities, but you would drink the water without it. But the Ma'aseh, it's a little better, like a Brita pitcher. It's not by the easy filter. Your mom is worried about bugs, you wouldn't drink the water otherwise. But if the water is drinkable as it is, but it makes it a little more pure, there's no problem with boira. So if the latka is edible as it is, there's no issa of boira, and Sechita, there's definitely no issa. Now this would also explain when someone he remembered to open a can of tuna before Shabbos. That's the good news. But if you got to drain out the oil or water of it, Squeezing that out would be no problem. That would be like kvashim ushlakos. That would be mutter if it's doing it l'tzoyrech of the oichel. Now this explains another big sugya, which we're not going to do now, but at least I shouldn't be remiss in not mentioning it. We know that there's a problem of squeezing out a hair, beard from water, or squeezing out begodim. Why is that a problem? Why isn't that another form of kvashim ushlakos? It's not there b'toilada, and the water's going le'ibud. And the answer is enechanami. If lemaisa you squeeze out something that goes le'ibud, it can't be asa on Shabbos. But when you squeeze out a towel or a beged, it's taken not Sechita mishum afarik. That's Sechita mishum malaben. Malaben is malacha deraisa. When you squeeze out a dirty clothing, the water comes out dirty. That's part of the Sechita. That's part of the libun. So it's not Sechita mishum afarik, it's Sechita mishum malaben. Squeezing out here and the water comes out, typically that should be a problem. But when you blot the hair with the towel and it goes right into the towel, that's not even a problem of Sechita. It's Sechita which is better than Hoylech, but never had an identity. It never went into something. And that's why the minig ha'olam takel, there's those that are machmir, but if you dry your hair, if you don't do it vigorously, and it basically goes from the water, it goes from the hair into the towel, it's a Hoylech le'ibud and not the b'toilada, that cannot be a problem. And last but not least, I should mention also, a wet sponge, using a wet sponge is a real Sechita. Because there you want the moisture from the sponge to go onto the countertop. That's a Sechita, that is a tzoyrech meimeyim, and that's awesome. And last but not least, someone asked me this question, and I don't know, because he was thinking, he was a Yerushalayim. Sometimes you drink a coffee, and especially you have a long mustache, so some of the moisture, coffee, whatever it is on a drink, goes into the mustache. So it's not nice, so you either want to wipe it around, or maybe you just quickly suck out the moisture from that's absorbed in the hair and the mustache. Is that a problem of Sechita? So the emes is, this can't be a problem for two reasons. This is no different than metzitza b'peh. Maybe it's even in the mouth. But there are two reasons why this should be mutter. Number one, the fact that it's not there b'toilada. The coffee does not grow on your mustache. So it's zichar not of the raisa. But then I saw Rabbi Yashiv has a tshuva in Chelik Av Simon Chav Zayin. His Adam, the great Reb Chaim, asked the shaila. He had a long mustache. Again, he had this problem. Can you suck out the juice from the mustache? So Rabbi Yashiv said, for another reason, it can't be a deraisa in the worst scenario, because it's not there b'telada. So it's better than a regular sharmei peres. This has two reasons why it's never a deraisa. Number one, it's not there b'telada, and number two, Sechita by Seyers of the Rabbi Yashiv, Sechita by Seyers only the Rabbanan, so it can't be the Raisa. So therefore, if it's a case where it can't be the Raisa, and it's Metzitza B'peh, it would certainly be Mutter. Guten Tag to you all.
Shame you should tell like you would give a big Yasher Koyach to Smith for today's share. Whoever was away in the summer wasn't able to take part in Irgenshire Torah's annual dinner, which took place in the summer. We still be Mishtatav and a Chelik and Abatas Torah of Irgenshire Torah throughout the year. It's a credit card machine, or you can call 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. In light of the upcoming mayoral election, the shul's having a voter registration drive. Whoever's not registered to vote, there are registration forms on the table there on the way out near the door. Allein ben Akasha must get both for the latkes is the show thing here on time mit schnell mal eine Office am Zirka Jago Terbiade. Gado ist gerade schnell aber. Warum da muss man mal kurz die erste von dem Karl Mashiach. Ich habe mit einer Rabbi so war Galo man kann mal Shalom is alles van een brief. Ja, dan kan ik gewoon zo zeggen, dat was van de in weer maar mijn Ali Sarabona van Tamile, maar Kol Tamile samen daar komen dat ze maar zo die was dat een die was daar. En dan nog een van de Rabbi die moest vragen van de Gairi dat zijn we kan moet u maar weer halen, maar mijn Jezus maar gaan we alleen ook Kol zo, maar mijn zo'n lang ja samen alleen wat Kol is zo, maar mijn The voter registration form could be dropped off, and most grocery stores have a box to drop it off. If not, you could give it to me or give it to Raskanim to process. Let's say the seeking of today's share. We're going to squeeze out the Paris Hanoishim Halacha.
Good. Just let's chaz what we learned today. The Av Malacha is Dash Mefarek, which is Oikedav Makam Gidulai, which has a lot of implications besides, of course, squeezing Zeis and Vanavim, but extracting honey from a honeycomb or milk from a cow, which is Asa even on Yom Tov. Dash is Asa on Yom Tov like Shabbos. Schitas Paris is a Telada, the Raisa, but it's not the Av, it's a Telada of the Issa of Dash Mishum Mefarek. The rice is only Zeis and Vanavim. Shar Paris today are Asamit Rabbanan, and there are three Asberim. The Chilik, either Shar Paris is Shinoi, or Shar Paris, the juice is on Oichel. It's not Zayim Mashkim, but at the end of the day, there's a big difference between Shar Paris and Zeis Vanavim. Primarily, the Chilik is regarding Mashkim Shezavu. If juice came out when there was no Issa done, grape juice ooze out of grapes, that juice is also on Shabbos, it's even Muktzah. That's only Zeis Vanavim, not by other Paris. When there's no Issa at all, there still could be Mashkim Shezavu. They're two independent Isurim. Cutting grapes, you should do it in a way that it doesn't produce juice, it's not a psik reisha, otherwise it would be a problem of Sechita, and Mashkin Shezavu. The aterim of cutting fruits that juice ooze out, and there's no Issa Sechita, either it's not a psik reisha, or you make it hoylach le'ibud, or there's a heta of psik reisha le'nichale and two derabbanan, as we said, or if you mechavan la'achila, that itself might be an independent heta, but the heta could be when it's applicable to squeeze it on, to cut the fruit onto an oichel. That's a heta ba oichel abol toich oichel. Grapefruit, although there are those mafakpik, the minig is to be makel, as long as you keep the heta of habol toich oichel. Slice a lemon and put it into a drink is fine, even though inevitably it comes out because there's no issa schita and there's no issa machzavu on shar Paris. Bang an orange and then use a straw to suck out the juice could be a problem because there's no heta of l'toich oichel because your kavan is to make a juice. Shar metzitza b'peh is mutter by shar Paris, by zeis v'novim yesh lahachmir, but in your mouth, sucking juice in your mouth, eating grapes in your mouth and spitting out the seeds and the peel would be mutter because that's b'toich hapeh. That's why the mesh bag that has even grapes in it is okay. Sucking a sugar cane is like shar Paris, that's mutter. Mila makes sure that the Mohel doesn't squeeze the gauze pad into the baby's mouth. Any other alternative is okay. Challah or cake into coffee or any other mashke is metzitza b'peh, that's mutter, like sugar cube. Oily latkes or tuna, if you do it to get out the unwanted liquid, oilach le'iba is mutter, that's kvash mishlakos, like cutting a pickle or squeezing a pickle. Sechita by seir or begadim is a different type of sechita. That's the sechita mishum Malabain, and beverage in the mustache, you're allowed to suck it out for a number of reasons. Yes, Rabbi.